Thank you, Sinomar, and thank you all for being here and have the space open for me to present a bit of my doctoral dissertation. So this is based on two chapters of my doctoral dissertation, and it is a process-oriented research based in 11 years of participant observation that sums up around 2 years of fieldwork altogether. And also I complemented it with a fieldwork in 2019, where I conduct key informant surveys, in-depth interviews. So a substantial scholarship have explained forest loss in the Amazon, both in terms of macroeconomic processes and household scale decision making. However, these farm activities follow up from a prior process of land appropriation that sets up the stage for the land change that follows. And this is a relatively scarce topic in the literature. And many scholars discussed broadly land grabs, the imaginaries, social and political aspects in anthropology and political ecology disciplines. But there is a lack of information on how such processes unfold in the region. Thus, the objective here is to demonstrate how public lands are acquired in the first place. And just to give you a brief overview of the conceptual framework, land appropriation is part and parcel of the process of frontier development, which many researchers have described as one of the capitalist forces engulfing peripheral regions. And enclosure here is the making off of access to a resource. It involves both the physical processes of controlling land parcels and the consolidation of judicial claims passed through a future owner. It alienates power, given those who lose resource access often must provide labor to the enclosures. And it's all facilitates the emergence of land markets by structuring exchange relations between owners and non-owners. Land creation, in turn, involves deforestation and preparing the physical template, transforming it into a factor of production, namely land. So the steps can have a licit or illicit nature and differ in regards to the capital intensity involved. The more the capital available, the more an agent can illicitly enclose and create land for agricultural production. Given deforestation costs money. So in this scenario, land speculators are key actors. They are individuals acquiring land as a purely financial asset to be sold on factor markets following appreciation. To give you a brief overview of the objectives, the first one is demonstrate how the contemporary process of land appropriation has evolved into a new industry. And I'll do that by providing you with a thick description on the form and function of Amazonia's land appropriation mechanism and actors. And the second is to estimate how large is the share of Amazonian lands that has been pursued to be appropriated illegally, and how much of deforestation is occurring on those illicit land holdings. And I'll do that by geospatial analysis, combining several data sets of from the government, Brazilian government. So we're talking here about this. I'm going to present a case study for the central Amazon basin. In this region where still there are many areas that are available and the process of development didn't happen as it happened in the arc of deforestation. The region encompasses 7 municipalities in southern Amazonas that experience high deforestation rates and it's now a prime target for development efforts of a massive infrastructure program to integrate South America from the Pacific to the Atlantic Oceans. It's also now a region that's free of foot-and-mouth disease since 2017. And now the region is able to export beef to other states and abroad. So although I focus on this region, much of the discussion here is relevant to other parts of the basin. To give you an overview of the land institutionalization in Brazil, the Seis Marias were lands subject to an obligation to cultivate, recognizing the right of property, but was limited to that obligation. It was an effective perpetual contract. It worked well for the sugarcane landowners using slavers in the Northeast, but it didn't result in the idea of increasing population and agricultural production elsewhere. When Brazil became independent from Portugal and adopted a monarchic regime in 1822, the Emperor Dom Pedro I resolved that lands under productive use occupied by possession could be kept, and all lands not in use became, in the Seis Maria system, terras devolutas. These are undesignated public lands, not assigned to any specific land tenure use, and this should be reverted to the state. And then in 1850, with the prohibition of African slavers entering Brazil, the first land law instruments land as a form of capital accumulation, allowing sales and purchases. This law allowed possessions to become private property for maintaining landowners' interests at play, creating an instrument of political economic power fundamental to understand the agrarian structure in Brazil. And land possessions acquired pacifically and with productive use had rights recognized, the direito de posse. Small holders now had a legit status of landowners. And terra devoluta could now be legally titled to holders that acquired it pacifically and were cultivating it. So thus, the end of the Seis Marias regime and the enactment of the land law democratized access to land privatization. With the Republican Constitution of 1891 in Brazil Republic, there was a transfer of those public lands, the terra devolutas, from the federation to the states. And this impacts the land grabbing type, land granting and titling. And the states provided freehold ownership and long-term leases called afloramentos. And in the Amazon, this was crucial for the expansion of the forest-based extractive economy of rubber and Brazil nut. So titles for large land holdings and hundreds of thousands of hectares were given to rubber merchants and Brazil nut entrepreneurs, modifying land tenure relations between rubber merchants and the rubber tappers and traditional populations. After the decline of the rubber boom and with the government plans to colonize the Amazon, the Land Statute of 1964 and all subsequent regulations reassured the legitimacy of the land possessions, so public into private lands, given the Pacific occupation and the productive use. And the Brazil Federal Constitution of 1988 also reinforces the social function of the land as a fundamental means of promoting agrarian reform. But it also allows for the redistribution of private lands that are not in productive use via expropriation. So for some authors, this incongruence between the civil law, the property rights, and the constitutional law that allows expropriation underpins many of the land conflicts that we've been presencing in the Amazon since there. Turning to more like how the modes of land appropriation in Amazonia happened. in the past. I divided, it's more or like dividing in three modes. So the first one is the state-led agrarian reform that was the way in the military regime. So in this mode, the support for the colonization aimed at integrating Amazonia to the national economy, assure sovereignty, looking for alleviate poverty and land scarcity from other regions, and of course, generate agricultural surpluses for export. It had in the first half, it had a focus on direct and integrated colonization. So settlement of rural landless from the Northeast and South Brazil in settlement projects, mostly in Pará and Rondônia. Those settlement projects are called Projetos de Assentamento. They provided infrastructure, services, housing, and agricultural support for those families. But after a few years, they recognized that was kind of a failure because the investments did not reflect in productivity. But it seeded a spatial grid, the roads and the nodes, the villages that make it a lot of forests accessible. Due to this failure, the second half was focused more on subsidies for private occupation with cheap land prices and tax exemptions, private colonization projects in Mato Grosso, and it attracts elites and corporations acquiring lands and granting titles of large swaths of area. They call the latifundios. And also, the government increased investments in resource extraction, such as mining, gold, for instance, and logging. And these attract industries, but also attract landless migrants that provide labor for those enterprises in the region. The second mode was more in the republic already after the military, and it also was called direct action land reform. So it's divided more or less in two main scopes. The first one is the social movements led. Is coordinated actions to obtain land for settlement via expropriation of large private land holdings. And it advances a political agenda based on socialist ideology. So this process that usually takes a decade, there were mobilization campaigns in cities, then committees were formed, and then a target property was selected, and then they were occupying that property and camping in the region. And then there was a proper appraisal by the government, and then they created a plan for development of a settlement. And then the approval of the Projeto de Assentamento was given. The second process is more like spontaneous direct action land reform. And it is ideological independent, but a state-sanctioned settlements projects to accommodate landless migrants and also the natural regional population growth. So this is kind of a gradual occupation of terras devolutas, where on-site residents trying to have a piece of land expand the same form of state-led colonization, but with no government support as before. So there is a individual demarcation we call the uso capião, and then there is the productive use, and then starts to form a community. And then these communities write a petition to INCRA and a project for the development of the settlement. And then there is a sanction. So this is more based on family networks through encouragement, labor power, and human capital, and sharing information. So they assemble those direct actions. And also in the middle of it, there is also intra-regional migration of families with more capital to invest in land acquisitions within and outside those settlements. And this kind of is supported by the government investments in the region in modernizing the infrastructure and the agricultural sector as well. And then there is a third mode, which is the illegal land grabs or grillaging. It's more prevalent from the 70s on in Pará, Rondônia, and Amazonas. So grilo means cricket in Portuguese. And the term grileiro is a reference to a practice of forged titles being made to look old by placing them for a few days in a box filled with crickets. So in other words, grillaging is the legalization of public lands through forged documents using bribery and usually frequent violence. So, and the frauds are various in titles, in procedures, in demarcation, in localization and registers. And for instance, they get a title and try to enlarge the areas in those irregular titles and usually forge old titles from the rubber boom period. And they amass the profits by reselling it or get bank loans, giving the land as a guarantor, or even for future economic activity like logging or agriculture, but also to pay fiscal debts and also to get compensation by expropriation processes. Grillaging uses government officials from all branches and also notaries, usually via bribes. They help them to forge documents that of those properties that are much larger than allowed by law. And sometimes also the rationale is parcellating these lands and sell this to ranchers and companies. In 2001, there was a parliamentary commission that was looking to the grillaging processes, and they found absurdly large forged titles. One, for instance, was larger than the area of Brazil as a whole. And this outcome in Amazonas resulted from the 5 million hectares of irregular titles. They canceled 37 million hectares. And in Pará, they confirmed various frauds in many large titles that had like more than 4.7 million hectares. And they found some criminal movement organizations working on those frauds. So these are the three modes of appropriation that historically are present in Amazonia. But the current mode of land appropriation, it's still a direct action, but it's not land reform. It is land industrialization process, as I will name it. So giving the barriers to old modes of grillaging, appropriation, and also given the established information networks and acquired experience of those actors, new processes of land appropriation and accumulation were reinvented. And of course, to serve agricultural expansion to attend increased global demand for land. And so this kind of evolved versions of the farmers presented. It has actors that have multiple roles, and new roles played by specialized actors emerged too. So the goal here is sales of land and with the future expectation of grandfathering in legalization, the state pardoning or allowing those illegal to become legal lands and be titled. So instead of focusing on agricultural profits, it's often a moneymaker endeavor focused on speculation and services aimed at public land appropriation. So it's a trade of services, many actors on that. So just to give a visual understanding of the process, here we have the three modes historically of land appropriation with the actors. So we have smallholders and landless people in small occupations via spontaneous reforms, getting settlements. The state-led in the 70s, 60s, the 80s had also settlement project creation for smallholders and landless people, but also privatized lands for companies and capitalized farmers. And of course, there is a process of selling and accumulation, and also expropriation from social movements led agrarian reform that created more settlement projects. And the third one here, the large land grabs by relators, helped by government bureaucrats, public notaries, that usually involve the parcelation of land and then selling to ranchers and capitalized farmers and companies, and creating accumulation of land for agriculture here. What is new or what is different, and it's the complexity of the contemporary process of land appropriation that involves new actors. So so we have new actors here. Instead of relatos just forging documents, helped by laranjas that I will explain later, now we have also politicians and money launderers and entrepreneurs doing grilaging. And due to the changes of the law that requires now georeferencing processes, we have specialized GIS services providers that help relatos and help the parcelization, and even can help to find buyers for those lands. And the government bureaucrats also, instead of not only help relatos in the forged documents, but also help create the parcels and even looking for buyers. And there is another variant of the grillaging right now, which is deforestation and farm formation, to increase the value of land being traded and then sell it. So this is very prevalent, and it's being reflecting more deforestation. And here, government bureaucrats are also helping ranchers in accumulation processes. And at the same time, the land users or the land holders are also being incorporated by other actors such as politicians, entrepreneurs, and money lenders. And laranjas are helping also in this process too. Yeah. So now I'll turn to explain a bit of my first objective and describe those actors and their work. So this table here shows the main actors, and the percentage here shows the proportion of informants that described processes involving them in the in-depth key informant interviews. So farmers as individuals may provide services as well. And the idea here is that one individual may act according to two or more profiles listed here. And in this sense, they are multivalent, meaning they play multiple roles. They are agronomic land users and can also engage in illicit land appropriation devoted to speculation. Explaining a bit the laranjas. Laranja refers to anyone whose good name has been used to register a parcel of land that in fact belongs to another person. So the idea here is to circumvent policies that would limit land ownership, large land ownerships and sales. This laranja odd name refers to the concept that the patron has planted a useful crop of orange, so orange, laranjas in Portuguese, to legitimate the claim and conceal legal improprieties. So just as orange trees would be considered an improvement and thus a prerequisite to holding title, in this scheme, the patron plants people as claimants in his or her land. So Laranjas are typically family farmers providing services for the corporate sector. For instance, an informant described a person that had control over 40 land parcels for his colleagues. And the laranja could be also invented or a phantom name taken from documents purchased from associations elsewhere. I, for instance, witnessed cases in which the interviewee confessed not to know who owned the landholding neighboring hers, but in fact, her owned it. So this is kind of a disguised strategy to avoid fines and prosecution too. So those cases illustrate that the laranja concept is evolving and becoming more complex over time. And once an elite-driven scheme, it has been adopted by smallholders who are trained in the make-up skills of land appropriation and speculation. So the guerrillas now work in three main schemes in the Central Basin. First, they can enclose the land, divide into parcels, and seek buyers. Alternatively, they can also deforest and sow grass seeds to increase their ultimate profits upon sale, implying they have more capital available to risk. The third type, and the most damaging one, is the formation of extensive branches for purely speculative purposes, often using laranjas or shell companies. Only in one municipality, 7 different groups have implemented this third scheme, and it's a likely mechanism to launder money from other sources. And they act on lands that they know has not been legally titled to anyone. And of course, they may coerce others using militias and even kill people, as many reports mention. And they do interact with other actors. They hire labor, such as the forest fellers, which is a specialized migrant right now that looks for work in deforestation in those regions. Before, it was more like a debt peonage scheme, but right now they are kind of a service providers that are moving to the region and set to do those works. And as this informant mentioned, there are like a shortage of those people right now, given the largest deforestation going on. Just one of these guerrillas hired 180 forest fellers to deforest activities in 2019. Yeah, and also we have government bureaucrats. So the informants mentioned corruption in government and identified individuals so engaged. These staff have privileged information about the location of public lands and expertise on the law's loopholes. And they use this information to support land appropriation by providing intelligence for villaging operations and assist corporate actors in finding laborers. They actively search for public areas without land claims and share with others that demarcate them and look for buyers further. So not to say that all government staff is involved, but these remote regions, there is always someone willing to be paid and be part of this industry. Like this mentioned here for the public ministry that found arrested a dozen state agency staff responsible for environmental licensing projects. And in addition to bureaucrats, politicians are also active in this land appropriation. These include mayors, state and federal deputies, senators from various Amazonian states, but mostly Pará, Mato Grosso, Rondônia, and even Amazonas. So, and they are known to finance grilaging and use laranjas. And of course, probably launder money from corruption, as one informant reported here. So these examples were common in all the informants mentioning politicians acting. So it seems that besides like bribes, now they are actively playing the role of land appropriation and increasing wealth, personal wealth. So entrepreneurs, different from large holders, the capital they invest in land derived from extraction sectors, including dairy plants, agricultural stores, sawmills, and machinery services, but also can come from textiles, food and gas retail, among others. Noteworthy here is the businessmen involved in legal activities must launder profits somehow, and they do it usually through shell companies in the name of laranjas. So for the logging industry, for instance, 38% of all deforestation infections, though, in the Amazon were attributed to the loggers. And like this operation here cited, there are numerous operations that arrest people cited for corruption, fraud, and money laundering in the region. And these schemes are becoming more and more prevalent. Finally, it's essential to note that this industry is technologically advanced, sophisticated. It relies on geospatial service providers to map those land claims. And these are often GIS certified forest engineers, officially registered as specialists in land issues. Some play duplicate roles, hired through public bidding process by governments to geo-reference public lands, like protected areas. They are simultaneously hired or employed by corporate actors or assist corrupt staff to geo-reference public lands and use maps to seek for buyers. So with the exposed so far, it's possible to have an idea on how more complex is the land appropriation process compared to what it was before. It has become an industry with specialized services that rely on privileged information and uses illicit money to conduct illegal activities that create great damage on the environment. So now I will turn to the second objective. It's trying to estimate the illicit land appropriation. And the idea here is important to know how a land possession is considered illegal. So the decision tree here tries to summarize it. If the land holding lacks a land register or a title, it is considered illegal when located within a protected area. That is indigenous territories, conservation units, and military areas. But the land holding is also illicit if located within settlements that are of the special type, which is like communal land rights instead of a private property partition. These are agro-extractive projects, agroforestry projects, and sustainable development projects, which are more devoted to traditional people and more in a regime of extraction and small agriculture for subsistence. But then if it is in conventional agricultural settlements, like settlement projects explained in the previous slides, then it is illicit if it's larger than 200 hectares in this region. And then when the land holdings are found outside protected areas and settlements, they become illicit when larger than 2,500 hectares. So land holdings below the stated area thresholds can be identified as licit based on landholder characteristics and appropriation history. But this is only possible to determine the legality of those licits on a case-by-case basis. But here we consider that those are likely illicit when all of those 4 pathways are illicit based on laws. I use the data from CAR, which is rural environmental cadastre, electronic public registry aimed at environmental control, monitoring, and planning. It's not an instrument of official land tenure regulation, but many have used it as a land grabbing instrument that legitimates illegal activities, and it's self-declaratory. So when the alleged landholder registers with CAR, a document is generated and links it to his social security identifier, which can then be used as a proof of land ownership should some dispute arise. But car registries give an idea of how much land has been self-declared as a private possession, independently on the land legal status. So the figure here shows car registries highlighting the lighter colors, the car overlaps, the registries overlap. There is an overlap in this region of 50% of the area, meaning like 100,000 hectares, 100,000 square meters without overlap, and 150,000 square meters with overlap. So the overlap indicates that competing land claims are widespread in this region. And not all land possessions are declared in the CAR system. So some landholders prefer not to register a car to avoid being identified by the government and held responsible for any environmental damage in the land. Thus, the idea here is that the magnitude of land appropriation is undoubtedly higher than what can be inferred using car registry. Even with such limitations though, car registries provide the only easily accessible information for inferring land appropriation by private individuals and corporations. The other data set is the Atlas Agropecuário, which portrays Brazilian land tenure by integrating different government data sets on land registries and removing these spatial overlaps using a hierarchical approach based on juridical security of rights. It combines private properties, settlements, protected areas, car registries, and defines 5 subclasses representing undesignated or public lands or terra devoluta. I removed car from this database, and as I understand it, it's not land tenure document, and it's considered, I consider it as a terra devoluta. In all areas that did not have any subclass assigned or were blank are also considered terra devoluta. So it's worth mentioning that the region has 13% of the area under indigenous territories, 44% under conservation units, 9% under settlements. Private properties registered and titled represent 14% and terras devolutas 20%. One would suspect that the attempt of appropriation is more on terra devolutas, but in fact it's elsewhere, as I will discuss. So very quickly here, this is the analysis I did. It's a Monte Carlo simulation approach. Sorry. First, in the step 1, I combined the atlas with the car. So here it shows the overlaps of car, generating pieces of areas that are in one land tenure and have a number of cars overlapped here, like 5, 4, 3, and so on and so forth. So first, I excluded all areas of private properties, water, roads, and urban areas, and just used the other land tenure category subclasses here. The second approach, for each interaction, one car registry piece was randomly selected to compose the total area for each portion of the overlapped car registry. So randomly select one piece to compose the total area, and I ran that 500 times. And then I had 500 total areas without overlap with different car pieces composing it. So, and then I summed the areas under the same branch in this, so that we have several pathways here. And then I summarize it, summing all car pieces according to each branch here. And the fourth step is just the extraction. So I got from these 500 iterations, I got for each pathway here, each branch, the lowest and the highest areas. And also I summarized the number of cars, the mean of area of car possessions, and also deforestation related for the illicit and licit possessions. So very quickly, the results. First of all, 13,700 car registries in the region, and this table shows that 2,500 of them were defined as illicit, and just like 18%. But the average of the area possessions are almost 5,000 hectares against the almost 300 hectares in this likely legal possessions. And among the illegal possessions, 29 and over 100,000 hectares or 1,000 square kilometers, with the largest one covering more than 1.3 million hectares. So probably has some forged and large document from rubber period not yet registered. So land holdings like these are clearly the attempt of speculate public lands. So regarding the area now, this table shows the analysis and the magnitude of the appropriation in the region. So we have the licit possessions in terra devoluta and conventional settlements, but the biggest chunk, and 81% of the area, are deemed illicit. So the terra devolutas are larger than 2,500 hectares. In conventional settlements, larger than 200 hectares, and even in communal settlement that shouldn't have like private property. And more crazy, it is like conservation units and indigenous territory long protected by law still are in disputes right now. And we can call attention that 13% of these illicit possessions are under conservation units of integral protection, and another 4 indigenous territory. But as we see, most focused on the conservation units of sustainable use. Yeah, considering the legislation, these areas will not be granted private land titles, and the car registries will be likely cancelled. But it depends on how the law changes occurs from now on. So in terms of deforestation, 55.7% of all deforestation in the area were within car registries, and 23% in the illicit and 33% in the licit. But the idea here that the actual numbers of illicit land appropriation and the associated deforestation is likely higher than those reported here, because not all land holdings, mostly the illicit ones, are registered in CAR. So in order to support these findings, I come up with these figures here that, considering all existing land appropriations, just to have an idea of the deforestation. So the figure here shows larger polygons rising since 2014. So from 100 to 500 just skyrocketed, but also you can see deforestation polygons from 500 to 1500, and even more larger than 1500 started to appear. So this trend reinforces that findings of illicit appropriation reflects increasing land speculation in the region, using deforestation as a form of of assured possession. In this figure, just for 2019 only, shows that most of deforestation and all the largest ones and most of the large classes here are in settlements or in designated public lands. So the land tenure public subclasses hosted most of these large polygons. So the last slides, just the preliminary conclusions, still working on it and trying to tie the loose ends. We have, I try to demonstrate that the contemporary modes of land appropriation resemble a land industry with specific actors and multiple roles than what has happened in the past. And it seems that Brazilian government allows this land appropriation in the industry to go on. I didn't touch upon it, but we have several laws since 2012 that started to help the agribusiness and the land appropriation regime, mostly by grandfathering in, like, or pardoning illegal acquisitions and transforming it to legal, and then okay, now we start again. And there's this new project law, it's called Law of Grilagem, that extends the area of appropriation and also the period. So it was before up to 2008, and this law tries to extend up to 2018. So, and based on the car registries, 81% of land possessions right now, not those titled red, but the rest, are illicit. In 23% of deforestation could be attributed to those illicit land possessions. But of course, as I stated, the numbers are actually much larger, as many illegal land holdings do not have a car. So we need more ways to try to control this process in the region, which is in the core of the Amazon, and huge diversity and provide various important ecosystem services for Brazil, for the continent, and for the global system as well. And if these are not worked out, the prospects are more contention, more uneven distribution of land and capital, more deforestation. So there are various implications for the pathway to follow from now on. That's it. I would like to thank you, the TCD and the GIA project, for help and support, not only in our community, but also with money from the field work, from the university, from the geography too, and from the design staff that helped me in the field work, and also the key informants and Bob Walker, my advisor and chair of my committee, and Cynthia Simmons for helping organizing the ideas and thoughts. And thank you very much.